Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series. Our show is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest app, which allows innkeepers to provide guests with their recommendations of the best local places to eat, play, and shop during their stay. The Frictionless Guest app is accessible through all mobile and desktop devices, and you can learn more about it by visiting frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com. I'm Matt Langen, and I'll be joined by Steve Short, the founder and CEO of the Frictionless Guest app. And our guest for this episode is Kenni Ball, who is a hired innkeeper for the Wallingford Victorian Inn based in Wallingford, Connecticut. Kenni will be sharing her perspective on what it's like to be an outsourced innkeeper, her passion for innkeeping, and how she got into the hospitality field. And Kenni and Steve, how you both doing today?
I'm great. Thanks. How are you guys?
Excellent. How you doing, Steve?
Doing well, Matt. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Good. Well, thanks for joining. And Kenni, let's jump right in from the top. If you don't mind, tell us a little more about your background and how you essentially grew up in the hospitality arena, which basically brought you to the Wallingford Victorian Inn.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I actually started at a very young age. I was 13 when I started working at my first B&B. There was a woman that I knew through riding horses, actually, and she was owned a B&B and was looking for somebody to be able to clean rooms and do things. And I thought it was going to be a neat opportunity, and it kind of worked out well where I would go work for her in the morning, and then she would give me rides to the barn in the afternoon, and it worked out perfectly as far as fitting in my schedule and what I needed to do. So I actually worked for her until I was about 18 and always stayed with her throughout the summers. Wasn't as busy there in the winter times, but still stayed very active with her, helping just maintaining, doing the maintenance work and things in the winter time. And then when I was 19 is when I took my first innkeeping job, and that was at a farm in upstate New York. And there, my job kind of was similar to innkeeping, but was a little bit different, had a little bit more avenues and different things going on because it was a farm, so there was other responsibilities that went with it. And then I stayed there for a couple of years and was kind of looking to spread my wings and go somewhere different. And so that is how I landed myself here at the Wallingford Victorian Inn as the innkeeper about 2 years ago now.
That's great. That's great. I know we talked about this before in a previous call. You mentioned how you find yourself to be more suited for the B&B arena rather than a larger hotel chain. So if you don't mind, tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the B&B thing, when I was younger, it was definitely a great opportunity for me to socially and network myself in communication and working on those skills. I've always been very outgoing and I enjoyed talking to people. That was one of the big things that drew me to this industry and why I continued to love to do it year after year. There we had a lot of repeat guests, and so it was fun to see them again continuing to come back and getting to, see how they are and different things. So as far as being more geared towards the B&B, what I liked about it is that you got to be more personal. You got to be more friends with them. You got to know different things that you don't always get to see, learn about your guests in chain hotels. I think the interaction portion of it is really what I enjoy a lot more. I think that it's special to be able to be part of their memories and actually be a name and a face rather than just like a number. Large chain hotels, sometimes you're going to get lost in the mix of things. There's multiple people at the front desk. There's not as much personal interaction. And I think in the B&B world, what I've, again, enjoy is just being able to see those people continuously, be the name and the face of the place. That means a lot more to me than being in those larger settings.
You actually did a stint for one of the larger chains for a bit, right? So you're talking from experience, not just, what you perceive. Is that right?
Yep. I had the opportunity to kind of see the back end of things there for a while. And it's just one of those things that, being in that, I just kind of knew it wasn't for me. Again, I think the biggest thing that I always stress is being a name and not a number. And that's what I enjoy about just working for people versus like companies and corporations. I think that for me personally, it does a lot more. For me, it gives me a lot more sense of pride to be able to continue on with things, to make things better. You're allowed to speak your mind. You're not constantly following the rule book of what has to be done. You're kind of allowed to make those judgment calls for yourself. And then you can learn a lot more, I think, being able to make those decisions for yourself versus just following what everybody tells you to do all the time. So, yeah.
That's great. And also, too, we talked about how kind of you got into the hospitality arena. Really, it was through real life experience, kind of growing up in the space, as opposed to really studying the discipline in a university setting. And, tell us why you found that the real world experience really helped shape you a bit more.
Yeah. So since I had done it from a young age, I kind of knew that it was what I wanted to get into. Schooling wasn't always my strong suit, and so I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to go to school for it. I did try it for a short period of time, about like 6 months, and being in that setting and seeing what it was going to teach me and learn, I quickly learned, which I already kind of knew about myself, is that I'm very hands-on and I learn a lot better by doing rather than sitting and being told. And so for me, not that, I don't believe that at some point in time down the road I might want to be able to dabble back into school, but for me personally, I wasn't looking for a position that was going to need a degree. I was looking for somebody who could believe in me and know that I could take on the job and let me learn and grow through that. And I've been very thankful and grateful for the opportunity for the people that I have worked with. And that's kind of how it's worked for me is, I've met these people who allow me and give me the opportunity to, explore their businesses and really be hands-on with it. And as I continue to grow and prove myself, they usually give me more. And so I am able to kind of teach myself through that versus doing the schooling. Again, there might be a point in time where there's certain things that I want to go back and learn as far as schooling. And there's just so many opportunities out there that you don't necessarily have to put yourself, into a whole 2-year program. There's plenty of classes and networking opportunities. And I've learned a lot of that through the different options and things that we have as innkeepers and the resources that we're able to take on. They do a lot of seminars and different things that are not only geared towards taking care of your guests and stuff, but geared towards those other end of things. So again, for me, I think it was all about being in the business, learning to network versus being in that university setting.
That's great. Steve, any questions there? Any thoughts?
Well, I just think it's unique. Your background is really unique. And talk a little bit about age and the fact that give us a little perspective on your age now. You're 25 now, is that right? We're
Correct.
Getting ready to be 25?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've been doing this with the Wallingford for a couple of years. I think you'd said before that in a prior conversation that we had that sometimes you get people checking in and they kind of look at you like, where's the innkeeper or something like that, right? Just yeah. So anyway, give us a little perspective on age and how that plays into perceptions or anything else for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So because I started so young, I kind of got a head start on things. For what you were talking about, like people coming in, I definitely think like avid B&B goers, a lot of what they see is going to be, older couples running it as a business or like one woman and, the husband's working outside of the place. It's definitely different for them to walk into somewhere and see somebody so young, whether it be that like, oh my goodness, they trust her with this or, what's her role here, different things like that. Sometimes people may think that I'm just kind of like the cleaner and that I work with women who are older than me. So a lot of times it gets mistaken that they might be the innkeeper and I'm just kind of the worker. It's definitely a different perspective, but I think it's a great talking point for people. It kind of intrigues people as far as like, how did I get into this? Just like for you guys, and what made me decide to do this at such a young age and take on so much responsibility, so it's kind of a neat piece and it kind of makes us stand out a little bit differently. Like I've said in a previous conversation with you guys too, it's funny situations like being able to carry people's bags up the stairs and not making them feel bad about those kind of things, that it makes it a little bit different and interesting. But as far as my age goes too, it's been a great opportunity for me to be able to set myself up for the future and be able to, continue to learn at such a young age. It's definitely been something that I will definitely treasure and I'm very grateful for.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the Wallingford Victorian Inn and tell us about, what drew you to the property and the dynamics of having you kind of operate and manage the inn versus the owners themselves.
Yeah. So I've always enjoyed a challenge, and I enjoy having lots of responsibility, which may sound silly, but I do. So this house here is actually built, it was built in 1891, and it's a old Queen Victorian. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous home. I worked in a Victorian back in home, and that was kind of where it started for me. I've always enjoyed older homes, the character of them, the history of them. I think it's great that people, are able to take these properties and turn them into something so beautiful and continue on their legacies and allow for them to be open to the public. So for me, when I was looking, I definitely knew I wanted to be in a smaller setting. And when I found this property, I just thought, what a cool place. And it was a quaint little town, wasn't much bigger than like where I was back home. And that was big to me too. I'm not a city person. I didn't want to take on something that I felt I couldn't grasp and wrap my hands around and be able to, direct people in the right direction. I didn't want to take on anything too big. So this kind of fit the bill perfectly because it had that quaint little feel that I liked. The house was absolutely stunning. When I came and I toured the place, I just thought, wow, like if I could have an opportunity to work in a place like this, what I could do. And the way that the attention to detail here, it was just phenomenal. Even growing from where I was before to here, there's so many different things and little tweaks and things that I've learned that I can now put into myself in the future. So, it was a very attractive property to work for. The owners are great people. And as far as, working with the owners and having me kind of operating the inn and them kind of being on the back end of things, I think that they did a smart move. For me personally, again, having the opportunity to work in an environment like this and to kind of see what I want to do for my future, I think that they were smart in this. It creates a great team dynamic between all of us. No one person gets stressed out by too many things. We kind of divvy up the work to a point where it's even between all of us. For them, it never becomes stressful. It always becomes an enjoyment. A lot of times you'll see people get burnt out in the business because there's just no downtime for them. There's no breath of air. When you're doing it and you live there and you're the one fixing and you're the one doing the bookwork and you're the one doing the legwork in the front, it gets challenging. And that's, I'm sure all of us innkeepers find that challenging. So for here, the dynamic with it being me, it's kind of worrying about the customers and the front end of things, and then having one person worry about the books, and then having one person worry about the maintenance and like our third party engines and things. It kind of splits up the team into a great dynamic. And then we're able to have other people kind of come in and help us too and allow us to continue to grow and boost that occupancy and never burning one of us out. As far as it being me here versus the owners, I think it's also a cool, aspect for the guest. They are kind of curious again of like how I got into it, but then it makes them curious to meet the owners. And then we're able to do social hours and things in the afternoon where the owners are going to come over and meet people. And it kind of gives them the opportunity to feel part of the business and get the inside scoop on that. Just makes it a little bit more curious and wanting you to come back to the property and building those relationships. And that's kind of the difference, I think, between the owners. We also see what we've talked about before too is the feedback that you get. Sometimes it's difficult for people to speak their minds to the owners because nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings. Obviously, as an owner, you take great pride in the place. And, I do as an innkeeper as well, but sometimes it's easier for people to give you the feedback to somebody who can kind of buffer it to go to the owners. So I think that sometimes it's nice to have that other person. And I even see that with the girls that work for us. We have girls that help with breakfast, and sometimes they might mention something to them because they may not want to mention it to me, or vice versa, so it kind of creates a nice environment for the guests to be able to give feedback as well. We've noticed that quite a few times. We'll have people come in and they actually will be speaking to the owners, but they want to speak to me instead just because, they've built that relationship with me, or they feel more comfortable speaking with me. So it's an interesting dynamic, the way that it's set up. But again, I think the biggest thing and what I like about it is that it really does create a good team aspect all around for no one person to get burnt out on it.
That's great. Steve, any thoughts?
Well, I think the other thing is that, and I guess we'll probably get into this maybe a little bit further down the road, but you've got, as you take on more responsibility, you've got kind of a longer term vision here as far as what you want to do with yourself and how you want to be more involved. And so I guess it's kind of neat that you're saying you're kind of doing the upfront operational things, but you might be taking over other aspect to, whether it's the bookings or whatever. What is kind of your longer term goal and what your vision is of what you want to do?
Yeah. So starting at that very young age, I've always had that desire to own my own. And I still think that I have that desire to do so. I definitely think that my approach towards it has changed much differently from when I was, younger. Obviously, I still am very young, so my approach is going to always continue to change. But for me, wanting to own my own now, I now realize the different challenges that come about. And, I never thought of a situation like this, where what if you did have somebody else run it for you? And where does that take you longevity wise? And does that allow you to do more of the business, whether it's hosting parties and you get to do that avenue of things? And that's, something that we're starting to explore here is hosting parties and doing those kind of things, which I'm now getting to dabble into, which is I'm realizing maybe that's a path that I want to go, is doing more events for bigger places. So, it's definitely opening my eyes to different ways of running things, which I find interesting. And, that ultimately is helping me decide for, my long-term goal, where I want to be and how I want to run the place. There's definitely things that I've taken from here that I know I would want to do at my place, and there's definitely things that I've learned that we do here that I wouldn't want to do. So yeah, it's definitely helping me, create a structure for myself to set myself up for the future,
Yeah, and you've been upfront, I believe, with the owners as far as saying, hey, I want to keep growing, and this is sort of my vision, is to maybe have my own thing.
Yeah.
And how has that worked out with them? The kind of the arrangement of this whole thing. How's that worked?
I am super, super lucky to work for people who have the kind of drive that I do. I don't know how I got as lucky as I did to fall into the situation, but they are very aware of the fact that that's, my goal someday is to be able to own my own and do that kind of thing. And I think they totally support that. That's why they continue to let me kind of run and go with things. They continue to put more responsibility on my plate and say, what can we do with this and what can we do with that? And, allow me to kind of take that perspective on things and run with it. I definitely think that they have, goals and things for themselves that, it's interesting. We never know what's going to happen in the future. This was their first property doing it like this, but, that's not necessarily where they want to stop. And I think that that's cool too. We've talked about different things, whether, we are creating a model here to move on to somewhere else and continue to keep this model and keep it running. This is all still very fresh and new to them. So, there's definitely room for growth either with them or just for me to, grow on my own. There's always different talks of where they're going to go with it. It's interesting, the different aspects we continue to grow into. We realize that, okay, maybe we need some place that's bigger that we can do more events in, and maybe that's where the next thing is. And, trying to figure out, for them personally, it's just trying to figure out where they want to be and where they want to continue to grow. But we definitely have a neat team. And I think that, they always say to me that, you're kind of along for the ride. And I appreciate that very much. And I'm grateful to be part of that. And so, whether it means that I hang on with them and I continue to ride the ride, or whether there's something that sparks up that I have an opportunity to do so for myself, you never know what the future holds. So yeah, it's a cool dynamic again, where they're able to know that I want to grow and do, and it kind of pushes them at the same time,
Yeah, and I remember that from prior conversation that things maybe weren't always this good. It's a two-way street for them in that they found you. You feel
exactly.
You're very appreciative of them, but at the same time, life was not always this good for them with you being around. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. As all innkeepers know, it's a very interesting job. It takes a certain person to be able to do it. It's definitely not something that everybody is cut out for and everybody is made for. And, I think that they definitely experienced that multiple times in the past for them. So I know that they're extremely grateful for me, and I think that that's what kind of makes this even better is, again, like I'm able to kind of push them in certain aspects too. Before they didn't have somebody in the position to be able to do events. Now that I'm here, there's that opportunity to be able to continue to grow there because we've got the other aspect of it nailed down. Now we're able to continue to grow. And so again, sometimes I'm even pushing them to be able to go in a different direction and continue to further the place, which I think gives them a motivation to keep moving forward. I think at first they might have been thinking, what were we thinking and what were we doing? But yeah, I would definitely say, not to speak on their behalf, but I think for sure that they're grateful to have somebody in the situation to be able to do what I do for them.
And if there are innkeepers out there thinking, the hands-on innkeepers thinking, well, maybe I want to get out of the day-to-day somewhat or a lot or whatever, and they want to go looking for someone like you, what would be your suggestions to them as to, I guess, maybe how to find someone and what to look for or ask or whatever in order to find a good match?
Yeah, I definitely think that you want to have somebody who's been in the industry before and understands it. I know previous issues had been people not understanding that this isn't a job that you clock in and you clock out. It's definitely all about time management. And I think finding somebody who has those, abilities to manage their time is a very, very important trait. If you don't know how to separate yourself from the place, you can easily drown in it. And so it's important to find somebody who is organized enough and has those time management skills to be able to say, okay, listen, I need a little time to breathe today. I'm going to do this, and then take an hour to myself and then be able to start fresh at 3:00 when check-ins start, But sometimes it's hard to find people who are disciplined enough just for themselves to be able to do that. And so I think it's important to not necessarily find somebody who has specifically done innkeeping, but somebody who definitely has been in the hospitality industry and understands that end of things. People can be difficult, and it can be emotionally draining to you sometimes if you're not the right person, if you don't have thick enough skin to deal with it. That's a big thing, definitely. Sometimes you're going to get feedback that you're not going to love, and it's important to be able to have enough poise about yourself to construct yourself in those kind of situations. And I think that that's something, when you're interviewing somebody, you just have to be able to, you kind of have to have that wit about yourself to know who is good and who's not. A lot of times you can kind of, vibe with the person or not. I know that they've talked to me before about there's certain situations they've been in where, they kind of knew it wasn't going to be a forever thing, but they were just trying to fill the position at the time, take the workload off. So I think if you are trying to outsource an innkeeper and find somebody, it's definitely important to find somebody who has those traits of time management, organization, a little bit of tough skin, and knows how to problem solve and, find solutions to things without having to call every 2 seconds to find a solution. That's not the point of having somebody in that role.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Hey, Kenni, I know we talked about along these lines about, you obviously have honed your instincts throughout the years through your experience. And, based on the university setting, you might not be able to learn that, at a college or a university or at a hospitality program. And tell us your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely here I've gotten to dabble into different cultures and things too, which I find very interesting. And those are things that you don't necessarily learn in school. Just how to react to different situations. Those are things that you're not taught in school. Whether somebody speaks to you a certain way or has a comment a certain way, it's about that poise and being able to know how to react to that. When you're in a classroom setting, that's not something people are teaching you. And that was a big thing for me. All these kids that I was sitting in a classroom with, we were having classroom discussions, and it was challenging for them to even have a discussion in the classroom. I couldn't imagine them going into the hospitality industry and trying to have a conversation with somebody. And that was a big red flag to me. I was like, I know my communication skills are there, and I know that I can hold a conversation with somebody. And that's kind of what it's all about. You got to know how to steer that conversation sometimes and how to bounce back and reflect those different feedback and be able to take those comments and know how to deal with them. Even if it's I've been exposed to a lot. So language barriers and understanding the patients and trying to take your time with those things. And, it's definitely something to me that even if I had gone to school for 4 years, I don't think it would have prepared me to deal with some of the situations that I've dealt with here. There's certain times where you have to make a judgment call, and, those aren't things that they teach you in school, about when you should make a call and when you shouldn't make a call and how can you handle this and how can you problem solve. Those just aren't things that I think you learn in school. But even if it's as silly as how do you fix the toilet for somebody in the room, those aren't things when you're sitting in the hospitality classroom that they're going to say, oh, well, you have to, take the back off the toilet, those are just things that's real world, that's real life. And those are issues that strike and come upon you in the hospitality, and being able to fix those things, that's where for me it was all hands on, was much, much more effective.
Steve, any thoughts?
No, I mean, we've gone from 13 years old and working, at B&B to all the way through to managing one and toilets, and we've covered all kinds of ground. So I don't think I don't think there's a whole lot more ground probably to cover at this point. I think it's a cool story and very, very unique. It really is. So
yeah, it really is.
Yeah, so, I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to share it for sure.
Absolutely. Kenni, we always ask this at the end. Is there anything else to add or anything we may have missed today?
I don't believe so. I think the biggest thing I like to stress to people is if you feel like you're really made for it and you want to do it, go for it. Don't always think that you have to have the highest degree to be able to jump into these fields, and don't be afraid. It's definitely, for me, it's been one of those things that I just kind of dove headfirst into and just kind of ran with it. So I definitely think it's one of those things, and don't think you're too young to do things. I've questioned myself many of times whether or not I should be doing this right now, but there's plenty of perks and opportunities to be able to do this job and why it's good for a young person, and I definitely encourage people to be able to get into this and keep the industry alive. I think sometimes having younger people in it kind of turns that little edge and spark to it as well. I think B&Bs are something that should not be lost and should continue on, and I think we need to get people into that field.
That's great. What a perfect way to end this interview. And for all of our listeners, you just heard an exclusive Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series with Kenni Ball, who is the hired innkeeper for the Wallingford Victorian Inn based in Wallingford, Connecticut. And as you heard, Kenni was kind enough to share her insights into her passion for hospitality, her role as the hired innkeeper at the Wallingford Inn, and more about her history and background and passion for innkeeping overall. And we really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast, brought to you by the Frictionless Guest app. If you wish to learn more, visit frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com.